1935, someplace in there. And if the electric grid goes down, then we're all in the 1800s. Which is why, as Peoplenomics readers know, I've installed 3.6 kilowatts of solar panels and sine wave generators, and yeah, it's all protected from sunshots and sun disease with the best transient protection I can design for it. So, it's a very difficult problem. And what I would urge anybody to do who's got the wherewithal to do so is to be prepared and continue a course of becoming more and more self-reliant, because by becoming more and more self-reliant, you can insulate yourself a little bit from some of these worst-case outcomes. Clearly, the dollar, which is now worth about 4.5 cents, compared with its starting purchasing power in 1913, before the income tax, before the Fed. Clearly, it's been well hollowed out, losing something like 95% of its value. However, could it lose half of its value again, which would, by the way, double the price of silver, double the price of gold, double the price of gas, double the price of food? And may that happen? Most assuredly it could. And so the real question is, how do you hedge that? And my answer, as well as Cliff's, is you get real independent to the best of your ability, and make yourself system independent, physically hard, mentally tough, and gain all the knowledge you can.
Thank you for that, George. And I think you've just answered every single forum question that we have to ask you tonight when you go home.
I'm sorry about the long answers.
That's okay.
Cliff and I are burdened with this, trying to give a complete picture. And when you start talking about things like market manipulation, by God, it really is an onion. And it's really got a lot of different layers to that onion. And the same thing is true of the powers that be. Now, did the powers that be know that they had set in force a massive global deflationary pressure with the unleashing of the Internet? Don't know the answer to that. I suppose that they probably did. And did the powers that be make a crap load of money with the Internet bubble? Hell yes. Did that create a lot of growth in the world? Yes. But one could argue that economic stimuli like the Internet at some level become disruptive to such a major extent that it becomes in the interest of the powers that be to shut them down, which is why the powers that be quietly are getting ready to shove money, I hear, it is alleged to me, to outfits like the Muslim Brotherhood through offshore channels in order to foment more of this dualism so that they can keep a grip on what's quickly turning into a loosening grip on chaos.
Okay. Thanks. I guess we're going to dissect each of those onion layers as we go through these questions. Romans, what's your question?
Hi, George. This is Romans 828 is true, but they call me Romans for short. It's
my pleasure.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you. By the way, I read your Urban Survival site every day, and I just renewed my Peoplenomics subscription, so this will be my second year with you.
I appreciate that.
Anyway, my first question is this. What do you think will be the real catalyst to cause the financial and investment markets to become irrelevant in our daily lives?
Oh, boy. That's a darned hard one. You could have asked me an easier one. More than anything, Roman, I think it will be an accident. The powers that be are at the moment, from what I hear, split into two factions, and they're both they both sort of are coming to the realization that global rev is a real deal. Their problem is that there are some minor differences on how they want to ride the wild bull while it works itself out. On the other hand, as soon as we cross one of probably 7 different tripwires or threshold layers, then we'll find we're suddenly at the point where the whole economic system is irrelevant. And there are separate tripwires, Roman, for each of those, what I call the 7 major functional areas of life, which are food, shelter, communications, transportation, energy, finance, and environment. So, for example, in the environment, we would expect that one to not be the tripwire this time around. It was set to be a well-orchestrated plan of the powers that be with a great global warming charade, or charade, depending on which coast you're from. Unfortunately, though, it's now clear from reading the solar data that we have entered a period of a cooler sun, less solar output, and even though cycle 24 is on its way up, and yes, it's going to be big enough to provide us with a Carrington event, and yes, Daryl's comments to the group here a couple of weeks ago about the sun twisting up and turning into an angry sun very well could be spot on. It was not something that could be as easily manipulated by the powers. So I'm not terribly worried about the environment tripwire. The food tripwire, on the other hand, oh my goodness, there we have a huge tripwire, and we've already seen it get out of control with the flooding in Australia, the flooding in South America, as well as in South Africa. So we're going to have some serious food shortfalls in the very near future, and because even this weekend it's still cold in the upper Midwest, when all of the cold weather extends into spring and then we get an unseasonable amount of thawing up north, that very well could result in the Midwest flooding. And then couple that with a return of what I'm sure you've read in Cliff's report, the weather problems of this spring, which will be like the North American comeuppance to the Australian flooding. At least linguistically, things point in that direction. So that's a tripwire. Food prices get too out of hand. People stop messing around with the politeness of exchange, and they go right to guns and clubs. So there's one tripwire. Money tripwire. If inflation gets too out of hand, crime is already. We're expecting to see crime. Myself and I, some of the people I know, we're expecting to see some increases in crime as gasoline prices get back to that $5, $6, $7, $8 range, and people will be committing crimes really for a multiplicity of reasons, but the number of crimes being committed for survival reasons will be the remarkable part of that tripwire. Monetarily, if the government is forced into a position of adding too many zeros too quickly, or decides to do a currency exchange, such as Mexico did in the 1990s, introducing the Nueve Peso in Mexico. It was either a 10-to-1 or 5-to-1 exchange. Then if people stop or lose their confidence in the U.S. dollar, which is dying anyway, then at that point money becomes irrelevant, as do markets. And we've already got the fuses lit and burning on the housing component. Transportation component, we got close to that tripwire when TSA was first beginning its groping last fall. There was a huge rebellion of public sentiment against that. So you can see, I guess what I'm trying to say, Roman, is that just like there's an onion that tells us at what layers the market is or is not manipulated, so too there's an onion on this tripwire thing. And I think it's going to be, you'll simply wake up one morning and the world will have gone past a tripwire, and whether it's the last foreclosure the system can tolerate, which triggers a massive crime wave, or it's too many zeros, or if somebody outs the real percentage of gold that's nothing more than tungsten bars covered with gold plate, or if the government decides it needs to seize silver and gold, as it did in the 1930s with proclamations to seize silver and seize gold, or any number of other items. But you can see there's kind of a succession of tripwires around most people's comfortable life that a lot of folks just don't want to talk about.
Thanks a lot, George. I really appreciate your perspective there.
Thanks, George. George, you mentioned about the powers that be, and some of the events arise are going to be manipulated and some are not natural. Do you think the collapse is going to be manipulated? Because on True News with Rick Wiles about 6 weeks ago, he had two guests which provided info from two independent sources that said we were close to a massive US dollar devaluation in economic collapse. Anthony Robbins, a motivational speaker, late last year put out an urgent warning about a collapse, and so did Lindsay Williams and his insider information. The warnings are now matching what you and Cliff have been forecasting about a collapse of the economic system and death of the dollar. How close are we? March 25, end of April for the summer of hell, October?
It's really hard to call. If I were going to throw a dart at a calendar, I would say July 27th. Let me see if that's even a trading day. Hang on. but I would say sometime in the late July to early August time frame. And the reason I say that is a couple of things. But the first one really comes from my long-term study of markets. And if you really want to look at something scary, in fact, I've got on my list for Peoplenomics tomorrow, you can dig up a day-by-day trading history of major market breaks, both 1929, 1987, 2001, 2002, the flash crash a couple of Mays back. There tend to be major market moves about 55 days, trading days, after a significant market peak. And so if February or, I forget if it's February or January, my charts blur in my head if I'm not staring at them, we can assume that the crash will occur 55 days from, let's say, middle of February. And because we could round that off to like 2 months and a week, so that would put us March, April. I would expect the crashing part to begin sometime late April to early May. I'd have to work out the trading days. But remember, Cliff's exactly right forecast about the financial crisis in November of 2008. You'll notice that it took the market another 4 or 5 months to actually work down to its ultimate low. So we might see something, and it should be really tradable too. Not that money means anything at that point, but we might see something